Okay, this lecture is over HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The first official release of HTTP occurred in 1991. We're going to talk about the process or the way web servers work either before CGI existed or even after CGI existed, but we have a situation where we're not using CGI. CGI stands for Common Gateway Interface, and we will talk about that a little bit later. But talking about what I'll call straight HTTP. So we have a user that's sitting at a computer, and that computer is running a web browser. Somewhere out on the internet, we have a machine that's referred to as a web server because it's running web server process or processes that service HTTP request. So back over on the user's computer, the user types in a URL. And when they hit the go button or the error or hit return, however you signify that you're done typing in the URL, something called an HTTP request is sent to the web server. And we'll look at the format of that request here in a moment. But without CGI, we're looking up the contents of a file. So the second step is the web server actually locating and reading the HTML file. And then what it will do, it will wrap some information around that HTML file, and it will send back what's called an HTTP response. That response is read by the web browser, and then the web browser actually images or creates the page that the user sees. So that's the process without CGI. Now, talking about CGI and talking about the process, CGI, as I said, stands for Common Gateway Interface. It's been around since 1993, and the purpose of CGI is allow you to create dynamically generated or created web pages, and this is done by running scripts or programs on the server. So with CGI, the HTTP process becomes this. We still have the computer, we still have a web server running, the user types in a URL, we have an HTTP request that goes to the web server, and this time, since it is using a CGI program, what happens is the CGI program runs on the web server, and the output of that CGI program is sent back to the web server process. Again, the web server may wrap some additional information in the header, and then an HTTP response is sent back. Sorry, there's a typo there. That should be response. And then the browser images the page. So that is very similar as without CGI. The only exception, instead of reading a file, is we're executing a program. So I said that the first step was something called an HTTP request, and this is sent from the browser to the web server as we showed in the graphic. And a very simple request will look like this. It'll have a method which either will be a get or a post. It will have a path, which is where we're to locate the file or CGI program on the web server. And then finally, the third thing we have is the protocol / the version of the protocol. So that's been HTTP / 1.1 for ever, it seems. So that's the current version. Now, a more complete or full request might look like this. So you say what you want, you give your email address, You can tell what kind of things you would like back. You know, I would prefer text / in particular an HTML document, but if that's not available, I'll take anything that is text. My user agent is how my browser is identifying itself. So this was identified as Mozilla 1.0. If you are going to this website from another website, you might have what's called a referrer. It's what website sent me here, and it will have a URL. If user ID, if authorization is required, you can put how you're going to authenticate, and in the case of user authentication, you would have a user ID : password. I've never seen this in use, but you can have a charge to that basically says what account or accounting information will you use to charge access to this website. And then you can also say, I want the web page if it's been modified since a particular date. And there's a lot more things that you can have in the request. Now, a response coming back will look like this. So looking at the parts, we first have what's referred to as the HTTP response header. So this is information about the document you're getting. So the protocol we were using was HTTP /1.1, which we're showing here. We'll come back and talk about that. Let me talk about the major parts here. So you have the HTTP response header, then you have a required blank line, and then you have the HTTP response body. Going back and looking at these a little more in detail, the first line is protocol /version, and then it has something called a status code, and then it has a reason, and the reason is really just a text version or explanation of what the status code is. So when you make an HTTP query or request, you're hoping to get back a 200 OK. And as you probably know, 404 is an error, which is page not found. So those are probably the two of the most common response codes you might get back when you make a request. Then this tells what we're sending back, the content type. So this is text, and more specifically, this is HTML text, is what that's telling us. And then down here in the body, this is the actual HTML code. So that explains the process of HTTP and gives you some information about request and response in that protocol.